Hello, Montana. Hello, world. And hello to all of our academic WorldQuest high schoolers out there. It's Chris Hyslop here from the Montana World Affairs Council. And this is another episode of Connect Montana, where we bring the world to Montana and Montana to the world. So as you know, for the past 15 years, the Montana World Affairs Council has hosted the Academic WorldQuest, which is a 3-day global education conference held each year at the University of Montana campus here in Missoula. It brings hundreds of the best and the brightest Montana high schoolers to engage and discuss interesting international issues. And the conference is capped off by a knowledge competition where teams from around the state vie to represent Montana in the national competition, which is held in Washington, D.C. This competition covers 10 different topics. Now, this year, that competition will be held virtually here in Montana, as well as the national competition in Washington, D.C. But to help our students prepare, Connect Montana is doing a series of 10 different shows, one on each of the topics, and tonight's topic is the U.S. Foreign Service in the 21st century. I'd like to thank our very generous donors, Stockman Bank, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, and Allegiance, who help us bring these shows to you every week. Now let me welcome our very special guest. Deena Mansour is the Executive Director of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center at the University of Montana. Since 2009, Deena has served as part of the leadership team, guiding the vision and operations of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center with a mission to foster globally minded leaders of integrity. During this time, she has raised more than $26 million in grant funding to support public diplomacy efforts between Montana and the world, including the overseas travel of hundreds of Montana high school and university students and professionals. Her leadership to enhance the intellectual environment of UM and the broader community draws on more than 30 years of international education experience in government, nonprofit, and corporate activities. She has extensive experience in diversity and inclusion, including work with Native American tribal communities and development of women's leadership initiatives. Deena earned her master's in public administration at UM and a bachelor's in international relations and economics at American University in Washington, D.C. She's traveled to more than 45 countries, including service as a diplomat in the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. Hello there, Deena. Greetings and welcome to Connect Montana. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Chris.
Deena, I'm so happy to have you. I'm just going to continue the introduction for one more moment, which is to say, to let everybody know that Deena and the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center have really been great supporters and great partners for us here at the Montana World Affairs Council, both in the academic WorldQuest and across many other things that we've done together. But this is the first time I've been lucky enough to get Deena on the show. So I'm extremely pleased that you've come. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule, Deena.
Well, Chris, thank you. It's really my honor, and it's been so impressive to see what you've done with Montana World Affairs Council. It's really our honor to partner with you specifically and the council in general. And it's wonderful to see so many of your supporters here. Our Mansfield fellow Otto Kester has joined us. I see some former UM faculty like Cynthia Garthwaite. So you have a great following here in Missoula and across Montana.
That's great. Well, thanks for all of that, Deena. Now they don't want to listen to you and I chatter. What they would like to hear is some of your impressions about the U.S. Foreign Service in the 21st century. Maybe, Deena, you could give our audience a little taste of what U.S. foreign servants, our diplomats, do, why they do it, what it means for us. And I am hoping you might save a little bit of time to talk a little bit also about the Mansfield Center exchange program, since we will have a number of high school students also watching this. So over to you.
Well, great, thanks. And and you have disabled screen sharing. I wonder if you could enable my screen sharing. I do have a bit of a PowerPoint here to share with the audience.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Do you see my PowerPoint, Chris?
Not yet. There it comes. Go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. Well, it's my honor to see you all here tonight. I love speaking to high school students in particular. I loved being in the Foreign Service, and I'll talk about what the Foreign Service is. But I always say, and I was just saying to my husband last night, that I feel my impact is greater here in Montana, that I'm honored to speak with you all today to demystify the Foreign Service, because it's something that belongs to each and every one of us. And all of us can be citizen ambassadors in terms of supporting the goals of the U.S. Foreign Service. So I'll just start here with some Foreign Service basics. So there's a very clear definition for our high school students of what the Foreign Service is. The Department of State is the lead institution for the conduct of American diplomacy, and the Secretary of State is the President's principal foreign policy advisor. The department's Foreign Service is a corps of about 13,000 employees dedicated to representing the United States abroad and responding to the needs of American citizens who are living and working abroad. There are also more than 45,000 locally employed Foreign Service staff at overseas posts. These locally employed representatives are critical to support the Americans that go overseas. They interpret the local context, they provide much needed continuity, and they're really the backbone of the Foreign Service. It's also important to note that the Foreign Service budget is less than 1% of the overall federal budget. And that's not just to support the Foreign Service, but that includes things like foreign aid. Oops. I skipped over my first slide. Sorry about that. So here are the Foreign Service basics. And it's important to note that there are 276 posts around the world, that while some countries may only have one embassy representing the U.S. Foreign Service, some countries are large enough that they will have multiple posts for representation. So in terms of the primary responsibilities of the Foreign Service, they are to fight terrorism, protect U.S. interests abroad, and implement foreign policy initiatives while building a freer, prosperous, and secure world. So the members of the Foreign Service utilize diplomacy in order to meet those responsibilities. Diplomacy is the art and practice of conducting negotiations and maintaining relations between nations. It entails skill in handling affairs without arousing hostility. And there are 4 key pillars of these activities: peace, prosperity, democracy, and development. That includes the protection of the U.S. and its citizens and allies, the assurance of continuing access to international resources and markets, the preservation of a balance of power, and the protection of human rights and democracy. Diplomacy is a critical aspect of our national security strategy. This national security strategy is something that is developed by each incoming administration. Our current national security strategy was developed by the Trump administration in 2017 and will be revamped by the Biden administration probably early in 2021. There are 4 key pillars of the national security strategy: to protect the homeland, the American people, and the American way of life; to promote American prosperity; to preserve peace through strength; and to advance American influence. So these pillars very much reflect an America First perspective of the Trump administration. But the Foreign Service and diplomacy are interwoven throughout this 60-page document. I've just pulled one section of the national security strategy to emphasize that America's diplomatic and development efforts will compete under our strategy to achieve better outcomes in all arenas: bilateral, multilateral, and in information, to protect our interests, to find new economic opportunities for Americans, and to challenge our competitors. And the U.S. Foreign Service is tasked with supporting these planks of the national security strategy. Now, the Foreign Service and the Defense Department are very close partners in implementing the national security strategy and the tenets of diplomacy. However, there is a dramatic difference in the personnel and the funding for each of these 2 entities. As I mentioned, there are about 13,000 members of the Foreign Service. In contrast, there are 1.3 million members of our military and active duty, plus another 800,000 reservists. Earlier, I mentioned that the foreign affairs budget was less than 1% of our overall federal budget. In contrast, the Defense Department budget is 15% of our federal budget. But it's clear that these two entities need to work hand in hand in order to support US interests. Our former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, was quoted as saying, "If you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition ultimately." I think it's a cost-benefit ratio. The more that we put into the State Department's diplomacy, that is the Foreign Service, hopefully the less we have to put into a military budget. So Chris mentioned that I was at the US Embassy in Jakarta. I was a member of the US Foreign Service. I passed the Foreign Service exam the first year I was eligible to take it at the age of 20. I joined the Foreign Service after 2 years of medical clearances, of security clearances, of preparation. But I had studied the Middle East and the languages of French and Arabic while I was in undergrad. In contrast, I was sent by the Foreign Service to Indonesia, a part of the world that I knew nothing about. And that is the excitement of the Foreign Service, is that you are able to travel around the world and gain new experiences and new opportunities. I have a friend who's currently the US ambassador to Equatorial Guinea, and she started in Thailand, went to Mexico, to Hong Kong, to China, and is now ambassador in Africa, her very first time serving on that continent. But when I was in Jakarta, my work was to collaborate with partners across the embassy to support our diplomatic pillars. There were a range of topics that were critical to US foreign policy. When we were talking about the US interest abroad, fighting terrorism, and building a freer, more prosperous and secure world, these were the things that we focused on. I was there for about 3.5 years. At the time, Indonesia was considered a big emerging market. And a key focus of our diplomatic efforts in the Foreign Service were supporting US businesses and their efforts to engage in trade with Indonesia, to support raising the or eliminating poverty as much as possible with our USAID programs. But certainly what was important to the US at that time was human rights and fighting terrorism. So we worked very hard to engage Muslim populations. Indonesia is the most populous country in the world in terms of a Muslim population. It's the 4th most populous nation. I believe it's 4th or 5th now. When I was there, it was 4th. But it is the most populous Muslim nation. So you'll see me there, that me on the left in the brown blazer together with a colleague from the political office at the embassy. And we were visiting a Muslim boarding school in central Java, the most populous island in Indonesia. And this was the first time that these students had ever met an American. And it was very unusual for women to visit their all-male boarding school. So this was part of the work of the Foreign Service, to go in, to share knowledge about the United States, to expose things about US society and culture to people who may know very little about it, and to demonstrate that the United States was not afraid of Islam, did not consider it a threat, but wanted to work hand in hand with people from all religions and all backgrounds. So this was an important part of my work in the Foreign Service. Also human rights. At the time, the country that is now known as Timor-Leste was East Timor, one of the provinces of Indonesia. It was a brutal occupation of a very small island nation of people who had lived under Portuguese domination, had suffered for many decades, and had thought that they would gain freedom, whereas Indonesia swooped in and assumed dominance over that country. About 1/3 of that nation died during Indonesian occupation, either from starvation or from military action. But the US government was very supportive of East Timor and Timorese independence. We worked very closely with members of the international media, who would go to Timor-Leste to take pictures of the atrocities and the torture. And at that time, they were forced to use dark rooms to process their photos. And we would allow the international media to come into the embassy to use our dark room where they knew it would be safe and secure and that prying government eyes would not see those photos and arrest those journalists and confiscate their film. So quite a variety of jobs that we did in the Foreign Service, really exciting work. But you know, the Foreign Service is in a bit of crisis right now, and I want to just shift a bit to that because there was a major report that just came out that I'm excited to share with you. It just came out last month in November around the time of the election, that the Trump administration has generally minimized the role of the Foreign Service in supporting the national security strategy. In one of the administration's first acts, they attempted to slash the budget of the U.S. Department of State and the Foreign Service by more than a third. That budget was protected by Congress because Congress generally recognizes and respects the role of the Foreign Service and the State Department. But many senior career officials were pushed out over the last 4 years. Others resigned in protest. The State Department has lost about 60% of its career ambassadors and 20% of its most experienced civil servants. So these skilled diplomats have generally been replaced under the Trump administration with campaign donors and other political appointees with little foreign affairs experience. So this has become a crisis. It's something that started before the Trump administration, that there were years of hiring freezes and spending cuts that caused many talented diplomats to depart. In sharp contrast, China's spending on diplomacy has doubled under President Xi, while American spending on the Foreign Service has declined dramatically. So to take a meaningful leadership role in the world, to protect American interests, and to avoid conflicts around the globe, the United States needs to reverse this trend. Many of the most serious challenges the U.S. will face in the near future requires that the Foreign Service take the lead. These include our relationships with such countries as China, leading a global response to the pandemic and its consequences, supporting American companies overseas during a devastating recession, addressing climate change, and negotiating an end to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. There are also significant challenges to be addressed within the Foreign Service, such as morale, a lack of diversity, and issues with internal culture. So the nonpartisan American Diplomacy Project at Harvard University has spent the last year talking to stakeholders that care about the Foreign Service, people in the Trump administration, people across the country, including members of the World Affairs Council. And they have developed 10 actions that should be taken to reinvent the Foreign Service. I'm going to summarize these here, and I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Okay, great. I don't want to be too distracted by this chat, but I want to be responsive. So here are the 10 actions that President-elect Biden and Congress should define a new mission and mandate for the Foreign Service and launch an urgent nonpartisan initiative to reform, rebuild, and reimagine the diplomatic corps, restoring the State Department's lead role in executing American foreign policy. They should pass a new Foreign Service Act. There are these Foreign Service Acts that are passed from time to time. I believe it's been about 40 years since the last one, and that this act will define the change that needs to happen to really support our Foreign Service. They need to challenge the Foreign Service to transform its internal culture, that there are problems with a very slow bureaucracy that is not tremendously supportive of innovation and change. To direct a focus on diversity as a first order strategic priority. This is something that we're seeing across the country, particularly in the last year, particularly given the issues around Black Lives Matter and the brutal deaths of Black citizens in our country. As of a year ago, African Americans consisted of just 2.9% of the Foreign Service, Hispanics about 5%, and Asian Americans about 3.5%. And geographic diversity is also critical. Now, as Chris mentioned, I went to American University in Washington, D.C. I passed the Foreign Service exam. The top 3 feeder schools for the Foreign Service are the 3 main universities in Washington, D.C. That's a bit of a problem. I mean, there are reasons for that. Obviously, if you're in Washington, D.C., you're more cognizant of the Foreign Service, you're more involved in it, whether you're studying international relations, journalism, or history, you might be predisposed to take the Foreign Service exam. So geographic diversity is something that is critical and something that we're working on here at the Mansfield Center at the University of Montana to get more Montanans in the Foreign Service. Point 5, to strengthen the professionalism of our diplomats, that there's not necessarily a career-long training. You could be in the Foreign Service for 20, 30 years, and there should be more of a career education as perhaps doctors or attorneys or teachers have. To initiate a wholesale overhaul of the personnel system, that it's a pretty antiquated system. We need more people in the Foreign Service. We need to capitalize on people's expertise. For me to have studied Arabic, which is a critical language, and not have been sent to an Arabic-speaking country is maybe not the best use of our resources. Though I loved Indonesia and it was well worth it for me. To create a defined mid-level entry program that most people 40, 50 years old. So to create a better mid-level entry program to encourage people to bring their expertise from other sectors into the Foreign Service. To create something that I think is very exciting, a diplomatic reserve corps, much like the National Guard. How do we get more people interested in diplomacy, maybe not pursuing it as a career, but trained and able to jump in if the Foreign Service needs more support? To create a stronger and more nonpartisan Foreign Service by expanding the number of career appointments compared to political appointments. And to finally rename the Foreign Service as the United States Diplomatic Service to signal the transformation and reinforce the vital role that diplomats perform in service to our nation. So these are a few things that the Foreign Service needs to look forward to and may celebrate under the new Biden administration. Nope, what is going on here? Okay, but I do want to take a few minutes. Chris, how much more time do I have?
Deena, can you squeeze it in 2 or 3 more minutes? Would that work?
Great. I just want to talk about how Montanans can be involved, and that's particular high school students. That public diplomacy is a specific aspect of diplomacy that everybody can take part in, that the individual helps to shape U.S. foreign relations one handshake at a time, much like what the Montana World Affairs Council is attempting to do. This is grounded in the Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961 that was developed by Congress at a time when we were heavily investing in war, in bombastic relations with the Soviet Union. And the Congress said, we must invest our money in developing mutual understanding between the people of the US and the people of other countries. And this impacts you as high school students to support your knowledge, your culture capital, your networks, your success in competing in a global economy. So this is something tremendously valuable for all of us, whether or not we're in the Foreign Service. There are ways that we can with Native local communities through sports diplomacy. I really want to point out one high school graduate, Ian Knight. He went on a Mansfield Center international program to Thailand when he was a junior at Hellgate. Though he went to Bozeman to study engineering, he realized that his true love was the Foreign Service, and he was recently informed that he got a paid internship for 2 summers, one summer in Washington, D.C., one summer at an overseas embassy somewhere in the world, fully funded with salary, housing, and travel. So this is a fantastic opportunity for him to explore whether he'll take the Foreign Service exam and pursue that kind of career. There are many travel opportunities for high school students through the State Department. You can check out their website. You can contact me at the Mansfield Center if you need any assistance. This is a sampling of things that you can do through sports diplomacy, to spend a year in Germany, to spend a year in a country with a significant Muslim population, to spend a summer studying a critical language, or to be a youth ambassador to Latin America. Specifically at the Mansfield Center, we will be recruiting for students to go on a basketball exchange to Honduras. That was supposed to have been last August, but that's postponed due to COVID. So we hope you'll check out our website if you're interested in travel opportunities. And finally, I want to encourage everybody to take the Foreign Service exam. This is something you can take when you're 20 years old. It's offered here in Montana, and the process can take 2 to 3 years. So if it's something interesting to you, just take the exam, try it once, twice, 7 times. I've heard people have taken it and successfully passed. So the Foreign Service is a critical aspect of U.S. diplomacy, and this is a long game. This is a picture of 2 ping pong players, one Chinese, one American. They really kicked off a new era in U.S.-China relations. We are going back and forth in those relations, but it's something that you look at as part of a long game, not a short process. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope that this is useful to you in understanding the U.S. Foreign Service in the 21st century.
Deena, more than useful. That's really extraordinary. I mean, we're so lucky here in Montana to have such a range of international experts who can come and talk to us on these really important issues. So let me just remind the audience, please feel free to chat in questions, but we already have 3, Deena, and not a lot of time. And I have to ask my question too. So what I'd like to do, let me just, since I was so intrigued by that quote by General Mattis that you had earlier in your presentation, let me ask you a question, which is like this. Given the unparalleled American military and economic strength, you mentioned that General Mattis said, we need the diplomacy and military to go hand in hand. What does that actually look like? What does that mean, Deena? And then how does that affect us?
Okay, well, first, I would like to believe that the United States has unparalleled strength, but I think that we have found that maybe we're not unparalleled any longer. So I'd like to just say that, when we're talking about the challenges of the Foreign Service in the 21st century, we need a strong Foreign Service to engage with states that should be partners, states that we hope should be allies, like China. Certainly with their Belt and Road Initiative, they are demonstrating military and economic strength that may be exceeding what we have to offer in the United States right now. But I agree with you that how do we have our Foreign Service and our military operate hand in hand? And one great example of that is what we have here at the Mansfield Center called the Defense Critical Language and Culture Program. And that program is funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, recognizing that we must make friends around the world, that we can't necessarily approach or lead with our guns, but we must train our military to understand language, to understand culture, to go in together with diplomats, together with people who have studied local cultures and local languages, and try to make friends and allies rather than deal from confrontation and from a position of strength.
Thanks for that, Deena. I just want to remind also everybody, I've posted a link in the chat box to an extraordinary video event that we had with the World Affairs Councils of America last week, where we did speak with Ambassadors Burns et al., who wrote that paper. There's a link in the chat box if you'd like to see that video. It's an hours-long talk with them discussing that very paper and those 10 points that Deena raised. Question from the audience. Can you say a little bit more about the Diplomatic Reserve Corps and its function?
So that is a great question that I am not optimistic that this would be funded, but the idea behind it is that it's much like the National Guard. If we have some kind of urgent need or emergency, the National Guard can step in. And we've seen that here with COVID in Montana with our National Guard. But you can also see when there have been times of stress around the world for the US and for the embassies overseas. And that could be a situation such as COVID, where we may need to send health professionals who are interested in international engagement. And they could be part of a diplomatic reserve corps willing to support the Foreign Service and go overseas. We have, for example, in Jakarta, where I served, there was a Navy medical research unit, and they were doing research on infectious diseases. They were partnering with the Indonesian Public Health Services. They were dealing with malaria malaria, tuberculosis, and no doubt right now they're dealing with COVID. So what if we had health professionals who could come in at a time of pandemic, jump into the role of the Foreign Service and go and support those units around the world and partner with countries. But the great thing about that is that it really ties diplomacy to the local communities. Imagine if we even had 5 people here in Missoula. I would jump at that opportunity to be part of it. If we had someone involved in public affairs, in health, in science, in governance, good governance or law, and you had people that connected the Foreign Service to us, but like Chris served in Myanmar, what if we had someone in that diplomatic reserve who was an expert on constitutional law and was pulled in to go and support Myanmar during time of elections?
Deena, next question. The major features of the new mission and mandate that you mentioned from Ambassador Burns's paper, of those, what do you feel are the most important? Maybe your top 1 or 2?
Yeah, I think my top 2 would relate to budget and personnel, that the Foreign Service is woefully underfunded. There are so many things that we need to do to support American citizens overseas and American foreign policy overseas, and you need the funding to be able to do that. And that feeds into personnel, that we really need probably another 5,000 members of the Foreign Service at all levels, that we need to take back some of those political appointees to put career Foreign Service officers in leadership positions. I don't think that there are any assistant secretaries right now that are career. So to address personnel and budget are critical.
Okay, here's a good closer. Are there any countries in the world without U.S. diplomats?
Well, that is a great question, and I wish I could all of them could come to mind. Certainly the countries with whom we have challenged relations, North Korea, for example. We do have the American interest section in Cuba. I believe we still have some diplomats there, even though I think the Trump administration was going to pull them all out. I think there's still a few there. There are some countries that I think that are too small that we don't have a representative there. Chris, maybe you can help me out and think of some.
Well, I'm not sure.
Liechtenstein.
I can't think of any, but as you say, there are also different levels of an American diplomatic presence. There may be a full-blown embassy, there might be a consulate, there might be an office or an interest office. But in terms of, I think you're probably right. Those people we're not so friendly with. We probably don't have anybody there. I don't think there's probably anybody in Tehran these days. I could be wrong.
Oh, right. Not in Iran. And certainly there are massive differences in representation. When I was in Indonesia, we had 500 people at the embassy. My friend in Equatorial Guinea, I believe there are not more than 12 Americans at that embassy. So the defense attaché is resident in Cameroon and flies in every few months. So you certainly have different levels of support and representation.
Deena, thank you so much for this Q&A and your amazing in 15 minutes kind of bringing together the entire U.S. Foreign Service present and hopefully in the future. We really appreciate that. And especially for our Montana students who are preparing for academic WorldQuest, I want to remind them as they're watching this to please take Deena up on her offer to be in touch about these exchange programs. It is a remarkable opportunity to engage in the world in so many different ways. The Mansfield Center does it better than anybody else. So please do that. You can get in touch with Deena directly through their website, I'm sure, or if you need to shoot me something, please feel free. So Deena, thank you so much again. I'm just going to remind everybody that next up, which is Thursday evening, same time, same channel, 7 p.m., Thursday, December 3rd, we have Dr. Karen Adams. Dr. Adams is going to talk on the purpose and prospects of international alliances. So, in the past 10 years, and especially in the last 4, we've heard a lot about the danger of fraying alliances. Dr. Adams is going to explain why states enter into alliances and why these alliances change over time and why they matter to us. So you don't want to miss that one. After that, we've got one more in our series of 10. You watch them all. Like I say, you'll be the smartest person on the block for sure. So thanks to all of the participants. Thanks again to Deena Mansour and the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center at the University of Montana. Good night, everybody. See you Thursday. Bye-bye.